I'd like for you to imagine for a moment that it's 1944, it's wartime. The beaches of Normandy, just a chaos of war, smoke, gunfire, debris, human casualties everywhere you look. Now, in the midst of that chaos, a young soldier, we don't know his name, but he notices that his squad is pinned down, out of water, dehydrating, losing hope. His commander, a man he'd followed to the ends of the earth, is among those who were pinned down. So this young, nameless soldier, he stumbles through the sand, rounds of bullets screaming past his helmet, just so he can get close enough to help. So he gets so close, in fact, so close to his squad that he manages to hear his commander kind of mutter something under his breath. His commander mutters, well, almost as a sighing whisper of hopelessness, the following words. He says, "I'd give anything for a drink from the well back home." This nameless soldier overhears that and without a word, without hesitation, grabs two of his buddies and they set out for what is possibly the riskiest mission of their lives. But they would risk it all because they knew their commander would have done the same for them. And without any thought to their own safety, they make it past enemy lines, dodging gunfire along the way until they find that well deep within enemy territory. And so they fill their canteens, and then they manage to make it back, bruised, bleeding, but alive, but also beaming with pride, because they're able to give their commander the one thing that he'd been longing for. But now imagine that instead of drinking it, their commander kneels, pours it on the sand, and then whispers, "This isn't mine to drink, because this belongs to someone far greater, someone far more deserving than me." Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, nice story, but how could any of that be, rooted in reality? Like, for example, first of all, would anyone ever really show that kind of loyalty and devotion to any one person? But also, when have you ever seen someone be so reckless and risk their lives for something so small like a cup of water? But then lastly, and this is the part that really doesn't make sense, right? No leader or commander would ever have behaved like that, right? Refused such a sacrificial gesture by refusing to drink the water that almost cost the lives of his men. You see, this morning, I want to take you back to an ancient story found in the Bible that actually mirrors this exact scenario. And that's the story of three men whose names we're never given, but who did something so wild, so brave, that God deemed their actions worthy of being recorded in the scriptures and therefore worthy of being remembered as heroes of the faith. But we don't know their names. We don't know their names, I reckon, one reason, because they're happy just to operate in the background. They don't need to be the main character. I really doubt they would have ever thought that we'd be talking about them thousands of years later, literally on the other side of the world. But since we don't know their names, today we're going to simply refer to them as the mighty men of David. Or David's mighty men. It's probably there in your Bibles, a title like that. These are the lesser-known heroes of the faith that we're going to be looking at this morning. And their story will raise some important questions for us today. Questions like, what drives such unwavering devotion? What could have possibly motivated these men to risk their lives for someone else? Was it blind obedience? Was it the thirst for glory? Or was there a greater purpose that motivated them? But then also, I think we're going to land on questions like this. Well, what kind of king inspires that kind of devotion? And what might it mean and look like for you and me today to live and serve a king like that? These are some of the questions we're going to explore as we unpack this short but powerful story from 2 Samuel. chapter 23. A story that isn't just about the loyalty shown to an earthly king, but a story that will challenge and inspire us, I believe, to live lives of radical devotion, radical service to a far greater king, the King of Kings. And you know what's interesting is that a story like this one, it's only made up of 5 verses. 5 verses that if you've ever read through the Bible, I'm sure you've read these verses, you've probably gone right past them, never thought twice about them, let alone stop to reflect on what lessons we might be able to take away from such a seemingly simple story. And yet, I can find at least 3 lessons. At least 3 exemplified through these lesser-known heroes. 3 lessons that I believe can show us this morning how you and I can grow in our loyalty and in our devotion and in our service to King Jesus. And so here's the 3 points, or the 3 lessons of what it looks like to serve our King with the kind of loyalty and the kind of devotion that only He deserves. Firstly, it's to serve our King with great pleasure. Secondly, we're going to see that it's to serve our King at great personal cost. And then lastly, it's going to be to serve our King with a greater purpose in mind. Now, very briefly, as I often, because I think it's important we do this, before getting to that first point, I think it's important we just set the scene, give some context for our story, okay? We're going to pick it up from 2 Samuel chapter 23, verse 13. Please follow along with me. It says, "And 3 of the 30 chief men went down and came about harvest time to David at the cave of Adullam, when a band of Philistines was encamped in the valley of Rephaim. David was then in the stronghold, and the garrison of the Philistines was then at Bethlehem." So, first thing to notice is notice where the story begins. It begins at the cave of Adullam. Now, I believe there's a reason why we're told the name of this specific cave, and that's because this particular cave was a significant location when it comes to the life of David. You see, the cave was located in the lowlands of Judah. Think 20, maybe 30 plus kilometers from Bethlehem, okay? That's like a 6 to 10 hour walk, roughly. Keep that in mind later when we think about just how far these men walked to go and fetch some water for their king. But now, more importantly, this cave was located in terrain that was rugged, it's rocky, making it the perfect place to hide. And so the first time this cave makes an appearance is earlier in David's life, before he was king. You see, the king at the time, remember before David's king, the King Saul, he becomes consumed with jealousy. He's consumed with jealousy after David's post-Goliath rise to fame. And so Saul starts to pursue David in order to kill him. David manages to escape, and he finds refuge, a hiding place, at the cave of Adullam. That's the first time we learn about this cave. Now, fast forward maybe a decade, maybe more. Now David is king, recently anointed as the king of Israel, but he's still facing conflict. He's still being pursued, but this time not by Saul. This time it's by the Philistines. The Philistines would be a constant threat, a constant menace to Israel. And we get a picture of this very thing back in 2 Samuel chapter 5. Notice, pay special attention. When the Philistines heard that David had been anointed king over Israel, all the Philistines went up to search for David. But David heard of it and went down to the stronghold. Because you've got Philistines being mentioned, you've got David going down to the stronghold. Israel would have had many strongholds, all over the place, but not many of them would have been down by the lowlands of Judah. And so all of that to say, these mentions of Philistine, of going down, all of that makes many of us believe that this is the setting for our story over in chapter 23. David and his men, they're at war with the Philistines. And this cave is not only a place of refuge, but now it's a stronghold. It's a fortress. And because of its terrain, it's just a great tactical position for war. So that's the setting. David's king, they're at war with the Philistines, but now these Philistines are camped. Did you notice where they're camped? They're camped at David's hometown. They're camped at Bethlehem. Just imagine that for a moment. Imagine your hometown, your home city, the place you grew up, the place you love, is under siege. And it's occupied by the nation that you're at war with. And so as much as you'd be longing to go home, you can't. It's not safe. And so all you can do is at least long for a piece of home. And that's what we see happening next in the story. We read of David longing for a piece of home. Notice verse 15. And David said longingly, "Oh, that someone would give me water to drink from the well of Bethlehem that is by the gate." So that's his longing. But now it's this longing that leads to the introduction of our lesser-known heroes this morning. And it leads to the first lesson that we can learn from them, and it's this: they serve their king with great pleasure. You see, with all of that context now given, okay, I wanted us to pick it up from verse 13 again, but this time pay special attention now, not only to David's longings, not only to the geography, to where we're located, but pay, more importantly, special attention to the actions that this longing leads to. Look at verse 13. And 3 of the 30 chief men went down and came about harvest time to David at the cave of Adullam. When a band of Philistines was encamped in the valley of Rephaim, David was then in the stronghold, and the garrison of the Philistines was then at Bethlehem. And David said longingly, "Oh, that someone would give me water to drink from the well of Bethlehem that is by the gate." Then the 3 mighty men, that's where we get our name from, the 3 mighty men of David. The 3 mighty men broke through the camp of the Philistines, drew water out of the well of Bethlehem that was by the gate, and they carried it and they brought it to David. Think about it. No doubt, surely, this cave would have had a source of water somewhere nearby. I mean, you don't build a stronghold or a fortress unless you've got access to water somewhere nearby. But here we've got David longing for some water. Now you would have noticed that it's not just any water that he's longing for. He's longing for Bethlehem water. And it's not like David's like being pretentious here or anything like that, right? Okay? It's not like he's saying, "Come on, guy, I only drink Evian water. I only drink like Perrier sparkling water. Do you really expect me to drink anything other than Bethlehem water?" Okay, so he's obviously not saying that. So what was it then about this Bethlehem water that made him long for it so much? Was there something special to it? Did it have some kind of special taste? Well, we don't think it's any of that, right? Because was the water of Bethlehem somehow different to the water that would have been just 30 kilometers away? Of course not. So we don't think that it has to do with the water. It has to do with Bethlehem. You see, Bethlehem was home. And so maybe it's in a moment of nostalgia, or in a moment of feeling under the pump because of war. Or perhaps he's remembering the last time he had to fight a Philistine. Maybe his mind goes back to the good old days, right? Of just being a simple shepherd boy, without the pressures of life, without the pressures of war. Perhaps his mind goes back to the first sip of water he got to have right after defeating Goliath. And he remembers how good that water tasted because it tasted like victory. But now perhaps he's also thinking about the fact that home is now being occupied by the enemy. So even though there's a longing for water, the greater longing, however, is for Bethlehem to be back in the hands of God's people once again. So that's when he simply utters the word, "Oh, that someone would give me water to drink from the well of Bethlehem." Now notice his words there. Did you notice that David's longing, it's not a command? In other words, he didn't say, "Men, I'm commanding you to go and fetch me this water." Did you notice that it's not even a request? He doesn't even ask them to go. He simply just expresses a desire from the heart. It's almost just like a passing comment that these men were attentive to, that these men picked up on. But now what really stands out is the conversation. We're not told this happens, but imagine the conversation that went on amongst these guys right after hearing David's longing. Even though we're not told explicitly this is how it went down, but we imagine the conversation went something like this. Guys, this is David. This is our king. This is David, our king, who's not ruling from some palace, ivory tower in Jerusalem. This is David, our king, who's in the trenches with us right now. And so if this is what the king wants, let's get it done. Let's go and get him the water he's longing for. So I imagine, maybe I've seen too many like Navy SEAL wartime movies, quick glance, there's a quick nod amongst themselves, right, as a way of saying it's go time. They grab the closest water jar that they can find, and they're out of there without making a sound, but also without hesitation. Hear this. They were out of there so quick that it's almost as if they were waiting for an opportunity to serve their king in this way. And so they cheerfully spring into action. And now their king's wish becomes their command. Not out of obligation, but because they loved him enough to act. And I think that's what it means to serve the king with great pleasure. It's to show that kind of initiative. It's to intentionally be looking out for opportunities to serve him. It's to serve without hesitation, but also it's to serve without obligation, but out of love and loyalty for our king. So I wonder if that's your heartbeat this morning. I wonder if that's my heartbeat this morning when it comes to serving King Jesus. Are you listening for the longings of his heart? Are you longing for the desires of, but then more importantly, are you then springing into action without hesitation out of your love and your devotion to him? I mean, think about it, and I love this picture. I think it's an important picture. You see, these men drew close enough to David where they could listen. They could overhear the longings and the desires of his heart. And so I think the question for us is whether we are drawing close enough to our King. Are we drawing close enough to King Jesus that we can be hearing, overhearing, listening out, picking up on those things that are dearest to his heart? See, the problem is everything around us, it's just so loud today. We're so distracted. Constantly bombarded, information, entertainment, notifications, social media, and it makes it just so hard, doesn't it, to be still, to be quiet, to be close, and to listen. To get close enough to our Lord, just to be able to hear the longings of his heart. Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever thought about what are the longings of King Jesus? What are the longings of his heart? I mean, Jesus gave many commands, instructions, like thou shalt not, those. But it's almost like they're the loud ones. They're the ones that are kind of easier to hear, even though they still obviously reflect the heart and the character of God, yes. But then also, did you notice there are times it's almost like we get to listen in on some of those longings of his heart that are more like whispers? Those desires of the heart that reflect his love for humanity, right? Like in John 17, when Jesus prays longingly for the unity of all believers. And you can hear his heart's yearning for all people, present and future, to experience intimacy. The intimacy that he got to experience with his Father. How about when he gives the parable of the lost sheep, reflecting his heart for the lost? But not only that, reflecting the joy it brings him when even one straying soul returns to him. Or how about when he says things like, let the little children come to me. reflecting his vision for the kingdom. That the vulnerable would be embraced. That you and I would never put any barriers or obstacles standing between him and the one he loves. And those are just a few of the longings and the desires that we get to listen in on. But the question is, are you close enough? Am I close enough to be hearing those for myself? Close enough through his word? Close enough through prayer? Close enough through Christian fellowship? But then more importantly, what do we do with the longings and the desires that we do get to hear? Do we just sit on those? Or does your love for him move us to action? And just to make the application even broader, I think there's a broader application. I wonder if, as the people of God, sitting here this morning, I wonder if we're listening out for those other people's longings in the same way. Paying attention to those unspoken needs around you. Maybe it's the single parent who's just getting by. Maybe it's the friend who's struggling financially but who would never reach out for help. Maybe it's the person at church longing for community, but maybe their personality, maybe the way they're wired, they're waiting for someone else to show initiative. See, because ultimately, and we're going to look at this more in our last point, but ultimately, when you are seeking to love others and their needs in the same way, ultimately, you know what Jesus says? Jesus says, you're basically doing it for him. Remember when he says in Matthew, the king will answer, truly I say to you, as you did to one of the least of these, my brothers, you did it for me. You did it for me. You see, listening for the longings of others, the longings of your brothers and sisters, but then joyfully springing into action. Ultimately, Jesus says, it's as if you're doing it for him, as an expression of your love for him, as a way of serving him with great pleasure. Are we serving him with that kind of great pleasure? A great measure of that. Are we serving one another with that kind of great pleasure? I think that's the first lesson that we can take from this story. We are called to serve our King with great pleasure. Secondly, we're also called to serve King Jesus at great personal cost. Look at verse 16 again. Then the three mighty men broke through the camp of the Philistines, drew water out of the well of Bethlehem that was by the gate, and they carried it to David. See, what we're seeing here is love in action, aren't we? But it's more than that. It's love in action, but at a cost. See, firstly, think back to the distance we talked about, the distance between that cave and Bethlehem, roughly 20, 30 kilometers by foot. It's a long way. You know, my wife Maru did a walk recently called the Bloody Long Walk. Because anything above 25 to 30 kilometers, I mean, to put it bluntly, it's a bloody long walk, isn't it, right? And we're not just talking metaphorically. Okay, we're talking literally here. I don't want to be gross, but there was like blood coming from her feet afterwards. She had blisters that popped. She lost toenails that still haven't grown back yet. Okay, she couldn't walk for days afterwards. I'm not even exaggerating. But now try doing that walk, 30 kilometers, not along the nice coastal path that run along our beaches, right? They're easy. Try doing that walk, 30 kilometers on the rough terrain of Israel, ancient Israel. Suited up in armor, carrying weapons in case you need to defend yourself, but then also carrying like heavy water pots to bring your water back in. But these men, knowing what a trip like that would look like, the sacrifice they would be making. Did you notice it doesn't say they doubted or they debated amongst themselves? Instead, they were just driven by their devotion to their King. They knew the cost, but the one they were serving, well, he's worth it. But now on top of that, distance was only half the battle. It was the danger involved in this mission that really gets our attention. I mean, think about it. The Philistines, they weren't pushovers, were they? They were built for, they're war machines. So trying to break through their camp, well, it meant putting their own lives at risk. Because even though we're not told explicitly that like battle breaks out or some skirmish took place when they get to Bethlehem, what we do know, and that it does give us the idea that a battle took place, right? There was a fight. Is that word that's being used there for breaking through. They broke through the camp. It's a term that actually means to burst through. In other words, it's a forceful term. In fact, I love this. Get this. It's the same word used for when Moses parts the Red Sea. In other words, what's implied is some sort of physical breach that does end up taking place. And just to further highlight this, that some kind of battle would have broken out, we're told that it's a garrison of the Philistines that was camped at Bethlehem. Let me give you a definition of that word garrison. It's a group of troops stationed in a fortress or town to defend it. So we're not just talking like a casual presence of soldiers camped at Bethlehem. We're talking armed soldiers guarding the perimeter on the lookout for any intruders. Meaning that sneaking past unnoticed, highly unlikely. So we'd be right in assuming that these men would have faced some sort of attack, armed resistance in attempting to carry out their mission. And David himself actually confirms this later when he says, "Shall I drink the blood of the men who went at the risk of their lives?" Implying that these men risked the shedding of their own blood out of love, out of loyalty. That's what drove them, love and loyalty to the one they loved. It's costly, they took a risk. Has anyone ever seen the movie Hacksaw Ridge? Remember that movie many years ago? Hacksaw Ridge tells the story of Desmond T. Doss. Desmond was a soldier, a Christian soldier, during World War II, and as a devout Seventh-day Adventist, he refused to kill anyone. He refused even to carry a weapon. Because of this, he faced intense harassment, ridicule for refusing to train with guns, instead choosing just to focus on his medical services, his medical duties. So he's constantly mocked and he's threatened. His officers wanted him discharged from active service. And it makes sense because they assumed that the lack of weapons training would make him useless when it came time to engage in actual combat. But then in perhaps one of the climactic scenes of the movie, May 5th, 1945, the Japanese begin a fierce assault against American troops, driving most of Desmond's battalion way back, but leaving 75 to 100 wounded men stranded there on the ridge. The officers ordered a full-scale retreat, but Desmond stayed, refusing to abandon the injured. And so now alone, and under constant danger, Desmond works through the night, crawling through mud, crawling through gunfire, always himself, just one grenade away from perishing himself, right? But one by one, he begins dragging the wounded soldiers towards the cliff's edge. And then using a rope system that he rigged up on the spot, he lowers each soldier one by one down to safety. And then he goes back again for another one. And then again, and then again, and then again. And why does he keep going back? Why would he do such a thing? Well, there's a scene in the movie where he actually, I believe he tells us why. There's this one moment when Desmond prays, "Please, Lord, help me get one more. Just one more, Lord, just one more." You see, when you love someone that much, in his case, not only his Lord, but also the ones whom his Lord had called him to serve. When you love someone that much, well, then you are willing to risk much. You are willing to sacrifice much. You see, for Desmond, the easy option was to retreat. I mean, that's what everyone else was doing. For these three men in our story, the easy option would have been to just turn around at the first sign of danger, first sign of things getting too hard. I mean, think about it. David didn't even know that they had gone to get water for him. And so if they had returned without any water, no harm done. Nobody would have ever known. But that's not what heroes do, is it? That's not what heroes do. You see, I believe this. I really do believe that this word risk, to take a risk, to be risk takers, I reckon that's a word that's kind of slipped out of the Christian vocabulary, hasn't it? But if you've kept and been here for some of our previous sermons in our series, I believe there's one common denominator that kind of unites all of our lesser-known heroes of the faith. Whether it was Shipra and Puah, whether it was Stephen of last week, whether it was the early church in general, whether it was Jim Elliot in Ecuador, whether it's like any missionary that you know today, like Ben and Ali in France, or even if it's, and I actually spoke to him this morning and he was okay with me using him as an example. Even if it's young Diego, who at 15, I think you're 15, right? Or 14, 15. He's going to have a crack. He's going to have a go at speaking at our Alawa Nights church service next month when the youth take over. See, because if there's one word that should be characteristic of all Christians, I think it's that one word, risk. And you know, the word risk basically just means leaving ourselves vulnerable and exposed. So what does that look like for you? What does that look like for me this morning? In what ways are you willing to be vulnerable and exposed in your service to the King? Vulnerable and exposed, perhaps to attack, perhaps to ridicule, perhaps to rejection. But we do it because we love our King that much. See, that's the lesson that we can take from these three mighty men, or from the Desmonds of this world, or even from the Diegos of this world. They heard the King's longing, and then they stepped out in faith and they took a risk. We are called to serve our King at great personal cost. Great pleasure, great personal cost. And then lastly, we are called to serve our King with a greater purpose in mind. Let me ask you a question. I wonder if you've ever been in a situation where somebody has done something for you or sacrificed something for you, right? And it was such a big thing that it kind of made you feel a little bit unworthy, undeserving of them having done that for you. You're super grateful. It's just that you feel like you really don't deserve this. See, that's kind of what we see happening next with King David. He's profoundly grateful for what these men had done for him, but the way he expresses that gratitude might surprise you. Because what he does next seems a little odd, to some perhaps even a little rude. See, imagine the anticipation of these men as they're about to return to King David with the Bethlehem water that he was longing for, and they're probably imagining already David's face when they give him this water, and they're like, man, he's going to be so happy. But then they get back to David, and then this happens. But he would not drink of it. He poured it to the Lord. He poured it out to the Lord. I mean, on the surface, you kind of read that, it almost seems a little disrespectful. Doesn't he know all that we went through to get him this water? Was all of that sacrifice for nothing? Thankfully, we don't have to take any guesses. Thankfully, David does give us an explanation. And the explanation of why he did that, it's actually quite powerful. He says, "Far be it from me, O Lord, that I should do this. shall I drink the blood of the men who went at the risk of their lives? You see, far from being rude or disrespectful in any way, David's actions show just how seriously he had taken their sacrifice. He's like, I can't drink this water because it's not just water anymore. This water now represents their lives. It represents the blood that could have been spilled by doing this incredibly loving thing for me. In other words, he refuses to drink the water as a way of saying, I'm not worthy of this. Because of their sacrifice, that water, it's now too sacred. And so therefore, this kind of service, this kind of devotion is something that God alone is worthy enough to receive. And so what does he do? He pours out the water, but not as a sign of disrespect or as an act of ingratitude. He pours it out as an act of worship. He pours it out as an act of worship. He pours out the water and offers it to the Lord as a way of leaving his men, and I think as a way of leaving us this morning with this important lesson. It's to view your service of others as an act of worship to God. View your service as others as an act of worship to God. I think that's what it means to serve with a greater purpose in mind. It's to view all of your service, all of your ministry, all of your giving, all of our sacrifice as ultimately being an offering to the Lord. Imagine if us, Alloa Church, if the whole church was to take on that perspective. Can you imagine? If we took on that, I reckon we would never have to do another call out for volunteers, another call out. We'd never have to do another call out ever again. Because we'd have a church full of people who would just gladly, cheerfully, sacrificially be serving one another, right? And not necessarily because anyone here is like, we know we're not worthy of it, we're not deserving of it, but ultimately because you have decided to offer your service and your ministry and your giving and your service as an act of worship to King Jesus. So let me ask you a question this morning. Let me ask you a question. If I'm able to put it this way. Is there some water in your life? Some kind of water in your life that you are still holding on to and haven't poured out to the Lord yet? Are there some talents that God has given you that you have buried and that you're sitting on? Are there any gifts, resources that you are hoarding, storing up for yourself? Perhaps it's your free time. Perhaps it's your free time that you're finding hard to surrender and to pour out to the Lord in worship. And we know it's a big ask. We know that no one in this room is deserving of that. We're not deserving of your time and your gifts and your resources and energy. We know that. In the same way that David didn't see himself as deserving of their great sacrifice. Which is why, please hear this, which is why our motivation must always be rooted in the one who is deserving of such a sacrifice. Rooted in the one who is worthy of our whole lives being just poured out to him. And what makes him, King Jesus, so worthy of such worship? Well, it's the fact that he first poured out his life for us, isn't it? It's his love in seeking us that then motivates our love in seeking others. It's his courage and sacrifice on the cross that inspires our courage and our sacrifice and our risk-taking for others. It's because he gave it all to us that drives us to say, Lord, I'll give it all to you. I'll give it all to others. You see, the love and devotion that these three men had for their king, an earthly king, mind you, it serves as a picture for the kind of love and devotion that you and I this morning are to have for our King, King Jesus. The kind of love and devotion that just joyfully steps out in faith and takes a risk. Why? Because we have that greater purpose in mind. The greater purpose in mind that this next group had. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Parabolani, also known as the Reckless Ones. The Parabolani were members of a brotherhood in the early church. They were a group of Christian volunteers, simply saw a need, and then by faith took a risk. You see, during the 3rd century, the Roman Empire experienced several devastating plagues. Unlike today, there's no retirement homes, there's no assisted living facilities, no modern hospitals to care for just the sheer numbers of those who were sick and dying. So therefore, these outbreaks of disease, they would just devastate entire towns, entire cities. And those who contracted these contagious illnesses, they were frequently abandoned by those who were healthy and then just left on the streets to die. But now here's where the gospel started to make a huge difference. Here's where the gospel started to take root and make a difference. Because as Christianity continued to spread, you know what also spread with it? Compassion, mercy, love, sacrifice. And so as the story goes, during the plague in Alexandria in Egypt, a group of Christians assembled to show a kind of love that could only be described as reckless, which is why they got that nickname. You see, while others fled the city, these reckless ones, they stepped into that plague-infested city. Why? So they could get close enough to care for the sick and the dying, exposing themselves to infection and disease, knowing that it might very well cost them their lives. And no doubt, greater purpose in mind, no doubt as they ministered to the sick and dying, I'm sure they shared the gospel with them, drawing many to the foot of the cross in the final moments of their lives. But why? Why would anyone take such a risk? Where do we find the motivation to love and serve someone to that extreme? Well, simply because they served a king who'd already laid down his life for them. And so I guess those are some of the questions that we're left with this morning, isn't it? Are we willing to follow in the steps of these lesser-known heroes of the faith? Will you serve with courage even when it costs you something or costs you everything? Will you give sacrificially even when maybe no one else ever hears about it or notices? Will you turn your service into worship, knowing that everything you have and everything you give, it all belongs to the King anyway? If so, well then how about we go out this week serving our King with great pleasure, serving our King at great personal cost if necessary, ultimately because we believe that we're serving our King with a greater purpose in mind, and that's to serve King Jesus. How about we sing one more hymn in response to what we've heard?